Welcome to the Fair and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. We talk a lot about the cost of living crisis, but now we've got an insight into how it's actually affecting households and individuals across the country, the people who are being hardest hit and the changes they're making to their spending habits. The insights come from CommBank IQ, a joint venture between Commonwealth Bank and AI company Quantium, and uses de-identified data from 7 million Commonwealth Bank customers to track changes in spending. Wade Tubman is the CommBank IQ Head of Innovation and Analytics. Wade, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you for having me.
How much fun is it having a data set of 7 million de-identified people?
It is a privilege. It always reminds me of Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
But no, we do have great power, but equally we take the privacy and data security very seriously as well.
So just broadly, before we get into the specifics, what is it showing? So the report you have done and it's released today, what are the sort of the top line figures it's showing?
I think overall, the message out of the report is there isn't one, sort of thing to point at in our economy, in our community, where things are going well and things are going bad. So it really depends on a number of individual factors in your life, what age you are, so what your income is, what life stage you're at, whether you have children, whether you own or rent. All of those things are personal to you, and they really affect, one, how cost of living pressures hit you. But two, I guess what levers you have to respond it. How can you change your spending? How can you change your day-to-day life to make ends meet? And so if there was one thing to come out of this research is that the danger of averages and not everyone is the same out there.
Okay, so let's dive into that a little bit. Now I'm going straight to averages, which you've just said don't do that, but I'm going to anyway, just to begin with. The whole idea of essential versus discretionary spend, there was some kind of interesting findings, depending on age groups, about discretionary and essential spend, particularly given that the cost of living crisis that's going on. It wasn't immediately obvious what these outcomes would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think discretionary versus essential spend is one that economists will often go to have a look at how people are feeling. And, in the normal world, in normal times, people tend to retreat away from discretionary spend into essential categories. So an example of that might be, you'll forego, new clothes, new cars, things like that, to focus in on putting food on the table, putting shelter above your head. That's a sort of a common thing. It's probably been around for hundreds of years. But, we're coming off the back of probably the most dramatic change in a long while with COVID. And what we're starting to see, or what we are seeing, is that despite the fact that that's what we would expect people to do when these cost of living pressures hit, we're actually seeing almost the opposite. It's quite counterintuitive. We're seeing consumers starting to preference or continuing to preference a lot of discretionary spend categories. So an example of that we're seeing is there is very strong preference of consumers out there to continue to spend on travel, holidays, accommodation, eating out, entertainment. So we're talking concerts, movies, the local fare.
Yep.
But at the same time, being frugal on a whole bunch of other categories. They're being frugal on keeping their house, the latest tech. We're seeing them be frugal on their clothing. We're seeing them even to cut back on some things like insurance and utilities. So it is very different and quite unexpected.
Another thing which is jumps out at me, and anyone that looks at the report, you've got some of the whoever your graphic artist who did this, your creative services team did a fantastic job because you're presenting this information in really interesting ways. Something that just came through, though, is the great difference between being a renter and a household owner. Even if you've got a massive mortgage, it just seems that much, much tougher when you're renting.
Yeah, so a couple of things that are going on here. First of all, I think renters, at least from what I read in the media, are sort of a bit of a forgotten group. We do hear about the housing crisis and we all know that rents are up, but I guess that we often forget, a third of our population rents, and rents are seeing some of the highest growth that we've probably seen in a long while. And definitely there's a lot of people out there in our communities who are renting that, every time that rent review comes around and those rents go up, it just puts them under more and more pressure. So I think that's one takeout. And the other probably comes down to sort of, again, this danger of averages, where at least in this version of the report, we look at homeowners as an overall group. And there's some very different subsegments in there. While homeowners as an overall group aren't necessarily feeling as much pressure as renters, as you pointed out, if you dive into homeowners, there's a number of subgroups in there. So first of all, not everyone that owns a home has a mortgage. Certainly as you get on to some of those older life stages and older ages, some of them have cleared their mortgages. And of the people that do have mortgages, everyone is at a different stage as well. So you have situations where right now, looking at our data, we could see that of mortgage holders, a third of them actually have substantial buffers built in. They've had their mortgage for a while. They've built up, whether it be in their offset account or they've built up a balance that they can redraw. And so a third of all mortgage holders actually, while their repayments are going up, they've got these buffers in there. They can just go into their internet banking and draw down or fix it up, for a period, at least for a couple of years. But then we have a look at a group, and unfortunately, there is a third of mortgage holders who have no buffers. And this is the group that, are really feeling this out in our communities. And they're really having to sort of pull all these other levers because you don't want to be moving out of your house and you don't want to be defaulting on your mortgage. So you start pulling more and more levers in your expenditure because you've got no buffers left on the mortgage and you've exhausted your savings.
Stay with me, Wade. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Wade Tubman, CommBank IQ, Head of Innovation and Analytics. Another chart, which I think is quite amazing, or a graph, is the year-on-year spending changes by age. Now, if we just park the 18 to 24-year-olds, that's my household. I've got a house full of 18 to 24-year-olds. None of them are leaving home soon. They're still spending. But once you get beyond that, sort of 25 to 29, 30 to 34, then right through to 75 plus, it is quite remarkable how the younger you are, parking that first group, the less you're spending, or the spend per capita is nowhere near as big a jump as a 60-year-old, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't hope for a better chart than this. I'm an actuary by background, so I love it to see
this one. Yeah.
when a chart comes out like this. It's even got that, in actuarial terms, we call that the accident hump, the 18 to 24-year-olds.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. Again, this is just averages, remember? Like we're not saying that every, 65-year-old is having a great time. It depends on all those circumstances. But as a view through our population, absolutely the younger people. And, from our data, we see that pretty much anyone under the age of 54 is not keeping pace with inflation. Their spending in dollar terms is going up, but their consumption, the number of things that they're buying, whether it be the number of bananas or the number of T-shirts, is less. It's not keeping pace with inflation. And so that's a big chunk of our population. It depends on what you consider to be young, but under 54 is definitely well out of step with the over 55s. And in particular in our report, we call out the under 35s. And the under 35s are definitely feeling a lot more. They're in those formative years. They're starting to move out of home in those mid-20s. They're maybe getting their first home. They're renting, potentially starting to build families through the 20s. And we're seeing it very clearly that their expenditure, the lever they're pulling, is a big one. They're just cutting back pretty much across the board. We do call out that, in particular, some discretionary items like apparel, they're very much cutting back on. In real terms, we're probably talking like maybe negative 15 to negative 20%, which is a large reduction in real terms. But across the board, they're really starting to pull those consumption levers to meet, I guess, the stress of this change.
Apparel's interesting because it is such a big drop. Is it something that we should be worried about?
I think it really depends on if you're talking about the business community, what type of business you're in. And I keep going on about the danger of averages, but, I'm not saying out there that, every apparel business is in danger. It really depends on your customer base. And so, again, if we think across all these different dimensions, if you're a business who focuses your apparel in on, maybe the under 30 market, you're trying to focus on sinks and dinks, and maybe at certain price points to appeal to sort of either mainstream or even budget shoppers, then the data here is saying that those customers are retreating from apparel at quite a high level. But equally, if you're a brand that has more broad appeal, or a brand that potentially appeals to some of the older age groups, you might not be seeing an effect at all. Or in fact, anything, you could even be seeing an increase of sales. And anecdotally, talking to our clients, we are starting to see that sort of polarization across different brands, or for some of the conglomerates, within their group or within their brand.
Fascinating. Wade, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you for having me.
That was Wade Tubman, CommBank IQ Head of Innovation and Analytics. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.